I never finished school. By the time I was 13, I was working in a factory basement, changing spools of thread for $1.20 a week. No formal education beyond basic reading and arithmetic, no diploma, no degree, no credentials, and I became the richest man in the world, not despite my lack of education, but because I understood something that schools never teach. Success is not about what you know, it's about what you do with what you know. Let me tell you what schools teach. Schools teach you to memorize, to follow instructions, to pass tests, to respect authority, to work within systems that someone else designed. Schools teach you to be a good employee. They don't teach you to be wealthy, because the skills that make you wealthy are the exact opposite of the skills that make you a good employee. Let me show you what I mean. When I was a bobbin boy in that textile factory, there were rules. Start at 6 in the morning, work until 7 at night, change the spools when the thread runs out. Don't talk, don't ask questions, don't think, just obey. The boys who obeyed best kept their jobs. The boys who followed instructions perfectly were considered good workers, but they stayed bobbin boys their entire lives. I didn't just obey, I watched, I questioned, I thought about how the factory actually worked. Why were the machines arranged this way? Why did some workers produce more than others? Why did the foreman organize work in this pattern? I was supposed to just change spools, but I was studying the entire system. This is what schools never teach you. They teach you to accept the system as given, to work within the boundaries someone else set, to follow the path someone else laid out. But wealth is created by people who question the system, who see the inefficiency, who imagine a better way. Schools punish this behavior. They call it disruptive, disobedient, problematic. But in the real world, this is called entrepreneurship. When I became a telegraph messenger boy, I was supposed to deliver messages and nothing more. Run from office to office, hand over the telegram, wait for a reply, run to the next location. The boys who did exactly this, who followed instructions perfectly, earned $1.20 a week and never earned more. I did something different. I memorized the streets so I could find faster routes. I learned the names of the businessmen so I could build relationships. I studied the content of the messages so I could understand how business worked. No one told me to do this. In fact, if anyone had known, they might have told me to stop, to just do my job, to stay in my lane. But I understood something fundamental. The job they paid me to do was not the job I was actually doing. They paid me to deliver messages, but I was getting an education in how the business world operated. I was positioning myself for opportunities they couldn't imagine. This is what schools never teach. They teach you that the assignment is the point, that following instructions is success, but in the real world, the assignment is just the beginning. The real opportunity is in what you learn while doing the assignment. In school, you work for external validation, the grade, the gold star, the teacher's approval, the diploma. The goal is to satisfy someone else's measure of your performance. This creates a mindset that destroys wealth, because in the real world, no one is grading you. No one is handing out gold stars. No one cares if you followed the instructions correctly. They only care about results. When I became a telegraph operator for the Pennsylvania Railroad, I could have done the minimum required to keep my job. Show up, send messages, collect my paycheck. That's what most operators did. But I wasn't working for a paycheck. I wasn't working for my boss's approval. I was working for my own growth. I taught myself to translate Morse code, by ear faster than anyone else. Not because my boss required it, but because I knew that skill would make me more valuable. I studied how the railroad operated, not because it was part of my job description, but because I knew that understanding the business would create opportunities. I learned about investments, finance, and capital formation, not because anyone told me to, but because I knew that knowledge would change my life. The difference is fundamental. Schools teach you to satisfy external requirements. Success requires internal drive. Schools teach you to ask, what do they want from me? Success requires asking, what do I need to become? This is why so many educated people stay poor. They're still waiting for someone to tell them what to do. They're still looking for the assignment. They're still seeking approval. But wealth doesn't come from approval. It comes from value creation. And value creation requires initiative that no teacher assigned and no grade can measure. In school, failure is punished. Get the answer wrong, you lose points. Fail the test, you get held back. Make mistakes, you're considered a bad student. The entire system is designed to make you afraid of failure. But in the real world, failure is information. It's feedback. It's the only way to learn what actually works. When Thomas Scott offered me a chance to invest in the Adams Express Company, I had no money. My family had no money. We were barely surviving. If I had been educated in the traditional sense, I would have been taught to be cautious, to save, to avoid risk, to work hard and slowly accumulate wealth over decades. But I understood something that schools never teach. The biggest risk is not taking risks. Staying poor is risky. Working for wages your entire life is risky. Never investing, never betting on yourself, never taking a chance, that's the most dangerous path of all. So I convinced my mother to mortgage our house. $500, everything we had, our only security. And I invested it in a company I believed would grow because of structural advantages I had identified through careful observation. Schools would call this reckless, irresponsible, foolish. But it was a decision that changed my life. That investment returned dividends almost immediately. It taught me how capital works. It gave me the confidence to take bigger risks later. And here's the truth that schools never teach. Every successful person you admire has failed repeatedly. They've lost money. They've made bad decisions. They've bet wrong. But they kept betting. They kept risking. They kept trying. Because they understood that the only real failure is refusing to try. Schools teach you to color inside the lines, to avoid mistakes, to play it safe. But no one ever built an empire by playing it safe. In school, you're taught to focus, pick a subject, stay in your lane, become an expert in one narrow field. This makes you employable, but it doesn't make you wealthy. I never specialized. I learned everything I could about everything that mattered to my business. I studied metallurgy so I could understand steel production. I studied chemistry so I could optimize the Bessemer process. I studied engineering so I could improve furnace design. I studied accounting so I could track costs precisely. I studied logistics so I could optimize transportation. I studied labor relations so I could manage workers effectively. I studied finance so I could structure deals intelligently. I wasn't an expert in any single field, but I understood how all the fields connected. And that synthesis, that ability to see how everything fits together, is what gave me an advantage over competitors who were more educated than me. They knew more about metallurgy, but they didn't understand how metallurgy connected to cost accounting. They knew more about engineering, but they didn't understand how engineering decisions affected profit margins. They knew more about their specific domain, but I understood the entire system. This is what schools never teach. They teach you to be a specialist, to know everything about one thing. But wealth comes from being a generalist who understands how everything connects. When I vertically integrated my steel operations, buying the iron mines, the coal mines, the railroads, the ships, it wasn't because I was an expert in mining or shipping. It was because I understood how all these pieces fit together to create a system that captured maximum value. Schools teach you to master one subject. Success requires understanding how subjects connect. In school, success is zero sum. There are only so many to give. If someone else gets an, there's one less for you. This creates a competitive mindset that focuses on beating other people rather than creating something new. But in the real world, wealth is not zero sum, it's positive sum. You don't get rich by taking from others. You get rich by creating value that didn't exist before. When I built Carnegie Steel, I didn't succeed by destroying other steel companies. I succeeded by making steel cheaper, better, and more available than anyone else. I created value. I made it possible to build bridges that couldn't have been built before. I made it possible to construct buildings that couldn't have been constructed before. I made it possible for railroads to expand in ways they couldn't have expanded before. I made the world more efficient, more connected, more productive, and I captured a portion of that value in the form of profit. This is the fundamental misunderstanding about wealth that schools perpetuate. They teach you that success means beating other people, getting a higher grade, ranking higher in the class, being better than your peers. But real success means creating something valuable, solving a problem, meeting a need, making something possible that wasn't possible before. Schools teach competition. Success requires creation. In school, knowledge flows one direction from teacher to student. The teacher has the knowledge, the student receives the knowledge. You're passive, you wait to be taught. But in the real world, no one is teaching you. You have to teach yourself. And the best teacher is not a person, it's reality itself. When I started my first steel company, I didn't know how to run a steel company. I had never done it before. There was no school for it, no manual, no teacher. But I learned, not from books, not from experts, but from doing, from trying, from failing, from adjusting, from trying again. I hired chemists to analyze our steel production, not to teach me chemistry, but to give me data I could learn from. I installed cost accounting systems to track every expense, not because I knew accounting theory, but because I needed to understand where money was going. I experimented with different furnace designs, different processes, different materials, not because someone told me what to try, but because I needed to discover what worked. This is active learning. This is learning from reality. This is how you actually gain knowledge that matters. Schools teach you to be a passive recipient of information. Success requires being an active investigator of reality. In school, the path is clear. Elementary school leads to middle school. Middle school leads to high school. High school leads to college. College leads to a job. Follow the path. Do what everyone else does. Success is defined by progression through predetermined stages. But I didn't follow any path. There was no path for a poor immigrant boy to become the richest man in the world. That wasn't a career trajectory anyone had mapped out. I had to create my own path. Messenger boy to telegraph operator, telegraph operator to railroad superintendent, railroad superintendent to investor, investor to industrialist, industrialist to philanthropist. Each step was improvised, each transition was uncertain, each move required inventing the next stage rather than following a predetermined route. This is what schools never prepare you for. They prepare you to follow, to fit in, to take the established path. But the people who create extraordinary wealth don't follow paths. They create them. When I decided to focus on steel, people thought I was crazy. I was already successful in iron and oil in bridges. Why take the risk of starting something new? Because I saw an opportunity that no one else saw. I saw that steel would replace iron, that the Bessemer process would make steel affordable, that America would need massive amounts of steel for infrastructure. There was no path from where I was to where I wanted to go, so I created one. This is the most important lesson schools never teach. You're not supposed to follow someone else's path. You're supposed to create your own. In school, progress is linear, 1 year at a time, 1 grade at a time, 1 course at a time. Slow, steady, predictable progression. This creates a mindset that success is about time served. Work for 30 years, climb the ladder slowly, accumulate gradually. But this is not how wealth is built. Wealth is built through leverage, through making decisions that multiply your impact, through creating systems that work without you, through building assets that generate value while you sleep. I didn't become wealthy by working longer hours than everyone else. I became wealthy by understanding leverage. I leveraged other people's labor. I hired thousands of workers. Their labor produced value. I captured a portion of that value. I leveraged capital. I used borrowed money to expand faster than I could have expanded with my own capital alone. I leveraged technology. I invested in the Bessemer process. One blast furnace with the right technology could produce more steel than 10 traditional furnaces. I leveraged scale. The larger my operations became, the lower my cost per unit. This gave me pricing power that smaller competitors couldn't match. I leveraged information. By tracking costs precisely, I could make decisions faster and better than competitors who operated on intuition. Schools teach you that success is about time multiplied by effort. Work hard for a long time and you'll succeed. But that's a formula for middle-class comfort, not extraordinary wealth. Wealth requires leverage. It requires multiplying your impact beyond what your personal time and effort could achieve. In school, you need approval, the teacher's approval, the principal's approval, your parents' approval. You're constantly seeking validation from authority figures. This creates a dependency. You learn to make decisions based on what others will think. You learn to seek permission. You learn to wait for approval before taking action. But in the real world, if you're waiting for approval, you're already too late. When I decided to sell Carnegie Steel to JP Morgan, my partners thought I was making a mistake. They wanted to keep building, keep expanding, keep competing. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need anyone's permission. I saw the future consolidation, trusts, monopolies, and I knew it was time to exit. I sold for $480 million. The largest business transaction in history at that time. If I had waited for consensus, if I had sought approval, if I had needed validation from my partners or the business community, I would have missed the perfect moment. Schools teach you to seek approval before acting. Success requires acting first and ignoring the disapproval. Every major decision I made was criticized by someone. invest in my family's house, starting a steel company, vertically integrating, selling at the peak. If I had needed approval, I would never have done any of it. This is perhaps the most dangerous lie schools teach, that if you work hard, follow the rules, and do everything right, you'll succeed. That the system rewards merit, that life is fair. It's not. I worked in a factory basement just as hard as the man next to me. He stayed in that basement his entire life. I became a billionaire, not because I worked harder, but because I understood that the system rewards leverage, information, position, and value creation, not just effort. The system is not designed to make you wealthy. It's designed to make you productive, to keep you working, to keep you consuming, to keep you in your place. Schools are part of this system. They train you to be a cog, to fit in, to follow instructions, to work for someone else. They don't teach you how to own, how to build, how to create systems that work for you. Because if they did, who would work in the factories? Who would fill the offices? Who would keep the system running? I'm not saying this to be cynical. I'm saying this because it's true. And understanding this truth is essential if you want to build real wealth. The system is not your friend. The system is not fair. The system will not reward you just because you deserve it, but you can still win, not by following the system's rules, but by understanding how the system actually works and using that understanding to your advantage. Let me tell you what actually made me successful, not what schools taught me, because I had almost no formal education, but what I learned in the real world. I learned by doing, by trying things and seeing what worked, by failing and adjusting, by experimenting and iterating. I learned from observation, by watching how successful people operated, by studying how businesses functioned, by analyzing why some strategies worked and others failed. I learned from mentors. Thomas Scott didn't teach me in a classroom. He brought me into a room where decisions were made. He explained his thinking. He tested my understanding. I learned from books, not textbooks, but books about business, engineering, science, philosophy. I read voraciously, not because someone assigned it, but because I needed to understand the world. I learned from failure, from investments that didn't work out, from strategies that failed, from decisions I regretted. Each failure taught me something schools never could. I learned from taking risks, from betting on myself, from putting everything on the line. You don't learn courage in a classroom. You learn it by doing things that scare you. This is the education that actually matters, not the degree, not the credentials, not the grades. The education that comes from engaging with reality, from building things, from taking risks, from learning what actually works rather than what you're told should work. If I could design an education system that actually prepared people for success, here's what it would teach: how to identify opportunities before they're obvious, how to take calculated risks based on information and analysis, how to create value rather than just performing tasks, how to build systems that generate wealth while you sleep, how to learn from reality rather than from authority figures, how to think independently rather than seeking approval, how to understand that the game is rigged but still playable, how to leverage other people's time, money, and expertise, how to make decisions based on data rather than emotion, how to create your own path rather than following someone else's. Schools don't teach any of this, not because teachers are bad, but because the system isn't designed to create wealthy people. It's designed to create employable people. And there's a fundamental difference. I became the richest man in the world with almost no formal education. Not because education doesn't matter, but because the education that matters is not the education schools provide. The education that matters is understanding how wealth is actually created, learning from reality rather than theory, developing skills that create value rather than just demonstrating competence, building relationships with people who are where you want to be, taking risks that schools would punish, thinking independently rather than conforming, creating rather than competing, building rather than consuming. This is what schools never teach about success. They teach you to be a good student, to follow instructions, to pass tests, to get credentials. But credentials don't make you wealthy. Value creation makes you wealthy. They teach you to work for grades. But the real world doesn't give grades. It gives results. They teach you to avoid failure. But failure is how you learn what actually works. They teach you to specialize, but synthesis is what creates breakthrough opportunities. They teach you to compete, but creation is what generates wealth. They teach you to follow, but leadership requires creating your own path. I'm not saying don't get an education. I'm saying don't confuse school with education. School is one form of learning. But the most valuable education comes from doing, from building, from trying, from failing, from adjusting, from trying again. That's the education that made me successful, not the classroom, the real world. If you're in school right now, I'm not telling you to drop out. I'm telling you to understand what school is and what it isn't. School can teach you skills. It can open doors. It can give you credentials. Use it for what it's good for. But don't let school trick you into thinking that following instructions is the path to wealth. Don't let school train you to be obedient when success requires rebellion. Don't let school teach you to seek approval when success requires self-validation. Get the degree if you want the degree, but get your real education outside the classroom. Start something, build something, try something, fail at something, learn from reality, take risks, create value, think independently, question everything. That's the education that actually matters. That's the education that made me the richest man in the world. And that's the education that schools will never teach you. Because if they did, who would work for the people who learned it? I learned it the hard way, in factory basements and telegraph offices, in railroad yards and steel mills, through investments that worked and investments that failed, through risks that paid off and risks that didn't. I didn't learn it from teachers. I learned it from reality. And reality is still the best teacher, still the harshest teacher, still the most honest teacher. The question is, are you willing to learn from it? Or are you going to keep waiting for someone to teach you, keep following instructions, keep seeking approval, keep working for grades? The choice is yours. The path is there. The lessons are waiting. But you won't find them in school. You'll find them in the real world, where success is not about following the rules. It's about understanding which rules to break. That's what schools never teach about success. Now you know. What you do with that knowledge is up to you.